Hello, everyone. Tonight we're stepping into a story that begins quietly, too quietly. Picture this, a warm Tuesday morning, sunlight glinting off the dewdrops on my roses, my arthritic fingers wrapped around the watering can, and not a single clue that everything I'd built was about to unravel. There was a stillness in the air that felt staged, like the calm before a storm you don't know is coming. And if you think you'd survive what came next, well, I hope you're stronger than I was. So before you get too comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And please, drop your city and local time in the comments below. I want to know just how far this story will travel. Now, turn off the lights, maybe let a little white noise play in the background, and let's begin tonight's journey together. The call came just after 9. My knees were sore from kneeling in the garden bed, and I just stood to stretch when the phone buzzed in my apron pocket. Neil. I wiped my hands on my shirt before answering. "Mum," he said, his voice cracked like an old hinge. "Can I come over? I need to see you. It's urgent." You have to understand, Neil doesn't say urgent unless someone's bleeding or being audited. I dropped the watering can right there on the soil. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" There was a pause on the line that made my breath catch, then a choked sound, maybe a sob. "No, Mum, nothing's all right." He showed up 20 minutes later with Avalon in tow, always Avalon his wife, with cheekbones that could slice butter and a perfume trail that warned of her presence 5 minutes in advance. She wore a blazer like she was coming to close a deal, not beg for help from her mother-in-law. Her heels clicked across my front step like a countdown. "Hi, Colleen," she said, kissing the air near my cheek like we were acquaintances at a gala. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Neil, meanwhile, looked like a busted kite in a thunderstorm's slumped shoulders, wrinkled shirt, tie half undone. I invited them in. Neil collapsed into the same kitchen chair he used to sit in when he broke the neighbour's window or failed a math test. Avalon placed her designer bag gently on the table like it might catch something from the laminate surface. I made coffee, I offered, pouring it into my good china, the ones with the gold trim I only brought out for Easter. Neil clasped his mug like it was life support. "We're in trouble. Mum, deep trouble." "How much trouble?" Avalon answered before he could. $170,000 worth, she said, holding her coffee like it was a martini, to stop the foreclosure, settle debts, and keep the children out of a shelter. The number felt like a gunshot. That was my nest egg 40 years of savings, Harold's life insurance, and the quiet compounding of a lifetime of frugality. It wasn't for vacations or fancy clothes. It was my cushion, my home, my dignity, my plan B. But when your only child looks at you like the world is ending, logic doesn't always win. "Where will you live?" I asked, fingers tightening around the porcelain. They exchanged a glance. "We were hoping," Neil said, each word a stone in his throat. "Maybe we could stay here, just until we get back on our feet." Avalon leaned in. "The kids love this house, Colleen. It would be stable for them, for all of us." This house, the 4-bedroom colonial Harold and I bought as newlyweds. The walls still echoed with our laughter and arguments. It was too big for me now, that was true, but I wasn't ready to let it go. Not completely. I looked at Neil, at the boy who used to bring me dandelion bouquets, at the man begging for mercy. "Okay," I said softly. "You can have the money. You can stay here." The relief was immediate. He launched across the table and hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. "Mum, thank you. I don't deserve you." over his shoulder. Avalon smiled. But it wasn't relief on her face, it was victory, that cold, calculated satisfaction you see on chess players who just checkmated your king. I ignored the chill that ran through me. Family helps family. Right. What I didn't know then was that the game had already started, and I wasn't the player. The house I gave, the lie they built. The days that followed felt like a sprint through molasses, slow, sticky, and exhausting. We moved fast, because Avalon said time was of the essence, a phrase she repeated like it was some kind of legal spell. She handled the paperwork with a kind of brisk efficiency that unsettled me. Neil just sat beside her, nodding when prompted, eyes always somewhere else, like he couldn't look at me for too long. I signed over my savings with trembling hands. I still remember the way Mrs. Henderson, the bank manager who'd known me since Harold passed, looked at me. She leaned in and whispered, "Colleen, are you sure this is your entire future?" "I'm sure," I whispered back, even as the air felt heavier. Jim Patterson, our family lawyer, was more difficult to convince. He looked at the title transfer papers and frowned so deeply I thought his face might get stuck like that. "I can set this up as a life estate," he said. "You'll retain some control of the house." "No," I said, "maybe too quickly. Neil needs stability. The kids need stability." "But, Colleen, I trust them, Jim." It was the kind of thing you say out loud so you can hear if it sounds real. Spoiler, it didn't. While Jim stepped out to make copies, I overheard Avalon lean toward Neil and whisper, "Let's get this done before she changes her mind." The words sliced through me like a paper cut, small but sharp. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe she meant something else. Maybe I'd misheard. But her smile when Jim returned, it made me want to disappear into my own carpet. Still, I didn't back out. I gave them everything, my home, my savings, my trust. I told myself this was what mothers did. And then they moved in. For 3 weeks, my home was filled with noise. Emma and Jake bounced up and down the stairs. Avalon redecorated with frightening speed. Out went my lace curtains and Harold's recliner. In came minimalist greys and sharp corners that made the place feel like a magazine layout, not a home. She even rearranged the kitchen cabinets. Do you know how disorienting it is to reach for a coffee mug and find nothing but imported spice jars labelled in French? Still, I smiled. I told myself it was worth it, that we were a family again. And then, one morning, I woke up to silence. No cartoons, no cereal bowls clinking, no tiny feet on the stairs. I checked the time, 8:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, school day, nothing. I walked downstairs. The house was empty, not messy, not lived in, empty. The decorative vases Avalon had carefully staged gone. The family photos vanished. Even the fridge magnets Emma had stuck up on my freezer were missing. I found the note on the kitchen island. Just one sheet of expensive stationery, folded neatly, my name scrawled across it in Avalon's distinctive looped handwriting. I opened it, heart already sinking. "Colleen, thanks for everything. We sold the house yesterday, starting fresh somewhere new. Don't try to find us. P.S. Old loser, you stink." For a moment, I thought it was a joke. A cruel, unfunny joke. I laughed. Actually, out loud. Then I laughed harder until I couldn't breathe, until I was sobbing on the floor of the kitchen I no longer owned. Sold the house. They sold my house? And they didn't just leave, they vanished. Neil's phone disconnected, Avalon's straight to voicemail, every trace of them online, deleted like a bad memory. I sat there for hours, knees stiff on the tile, the note clutched in my hand. I didn't eat. I didn't cry again. I just sat. At some point, my phone buzzed, a message from an unfamiliar number. House sale complete. New owners take possession Monday. You must vacate by Sunday. That was in 3 days. I had no money, no home, no son, no backup plan. Oh, and as a fun bonus, they'd erased any legal connection I had to the property. I called Jim Patterson in a panic. He was furious. They tricked you, he said, voice shaking. They knew what they were doing. But is it illegal? I asked. He hesitated. It's despicable, immoral, but not necessarily illegal unless we can prove fraud or intent. Intent, huh? That evening, Mrs. Henley from next door came by with a tuna casserole and concern in her eyes. Colleen, I saw a moving truck early this morning. What's going on? The words came out of me in pieces. Money, house, gone, betrayal, the note. She sat down and cried harder than I did. You can't stay here, she said finally, but you can stay with me for now. I can't impose. You're not imposing. You're surviving. We packed my things that night, or rather, what little remained. My life fit into 5 suitcases and a laundry basket. As I zipped up the final bag, I looked around at the shell of the home I'd once loved. The memories clung to the walls, but the warmth was gone. This wasn't my house anymore. It was just another stop on the road to nowhere. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept hearing Avalon's voice in my head. Old loser, you stink. She wanted me to feel worthless. She had no idea what she'd just awakened. An empty home and a cruel note. The next morning, I sat on the edge of Mrs. Henley's guest bed, staring at the ceiling fans spinning slowly overhead. The gentle whirring should have been comforting, but it only made me feel suspended in time, stuck in the in-between, not quite awake, not fully dreaming. I was 68 years old and homeless. Let that sink in for a second. Not because of a fire, not because of medical bills or some cruel twist of fate. No, I was homeless because I trusted my son. That trust had cost me everything. Over breakfast, Mrs. Henley pushed a mug of chamomile tea into my hands like it might glue the cracks back together. You should go back to Jim Patterson, she said gently. There has to be something you can do. I already did, I muttered. He said unless we can prove fraud, it's just in family business, not criminal. She clicked her tongue. If that's not fraud, I'll eat my hydrangeas. I cracked a tiny smile at that, my first in days. Don't threaten your plants, Margaret. I'll do worse if I ever see that witch Avalon again, she huffed. But her concern wasn't just noise. That afternoon, she handed me a manila folder filled with printed pages, real estate listings, legal notices, and at the bottom a screenshot from the online listing for my house. My house. I studied it like a stranger would, like it wasn't once filled with birthday balloons and burnt Thanksgiving turkeys. The price was listed at $340,000. They'd walked away with more than double what I'd given them. But one thing stood out: the disclosure section. Buried in the fine print were the words, previous subsurface instability noted, foundation issues under assessment. My blood turned to ice. 15 years ago, Harold and I had found out that the house was built on unstable soil. A contractor had used the phrase powdered clay base with high shifting risk. I remember because Harold had repeated it every time it rained like he was quoting Shakespeare. We'd chosen to ignore it. Too expensive to fix. We simply never touched the basement again. Neil knew. He was there when we got that report. He knew every detail, which meant when he sold the house, he either failed to mention those risks, or he lied about them. A chill crept through me. Suddenly, this wasn't just betrayal, it was deception. I called Jim. He picked up on the first ring. Colleen. "There's something you need to see," I told him, voice steady despite the tremble in my chest, and I think they committed fraud after all. He asked me to meet him at his office the next morning. When I arrived, I brought every document. I still had the old structural report, the engineer's name, the email receipts, even a photo of the cracked basement wall. Jim combed through everything with the precision of a hawk circling its prey. "This changes things," he said finally. "You disclosed nothing about the foundation to the buyers because you thought they were keeping the house, but Neil knew. So that means he knowingly sold a structurally unstable property. That's misrepresentation. If we can prove intent, we might have a fraud case." I leaned back in the chair, staring out the window. Intent. Avalon whispering, "Let's get this done before she changes her mind." The rushed signatures. The fact that they'd left in the dead of night. Oh, there was intent. All right. There was enough intent to build a pyramid out of. Jim made some calls. He looped in the buyer's real estate agent, who confirmed what we feared. They were furious, and they were ready to sue. A lawsuit meant investigations, and investigations, those might lead to Neil and Avalon being found. That evening, as I sipped lukewarm tea in Margaret's kitchen, the phone rang. A woman with a crisp, almost clinical voice introduced herself. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh and Associates. We're representing the Hendersons, the buyers of 47 Maple Street. I was wondering if you might be able to assist us." My grip tightened. "What do you need?" She hesitated. The Hendersons are facing over $200,000 in potential foundation repairs. They've attempted to reach the sellers, but the couple appears to have vanished. That's not surprising. "Do you know how we might contact them?" I stared at the old note card on the fridge where Mrs. Henley had written her chicken casserole recipe. My eyes drifted to the last line, "Crush the crackers, but gently. It's not their fault." That's how I felt, crushed, but I didn't want to feel that way anymore. "I'm sorry," I said sweetly. "I have no idea where they are." Which wasn't exactly a lie, not yet. The next day, the internet did its thing. Someone sent me a news clip from a Costa Rican English-language newspaper. American couple under investigation for real estate fraud. Right below the headline was a photo. Neil, Avalon, handcuffed, looking like drowned rats pulled from a swimming pool full of secrets. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. For the first time in weeks, the tears that filled my eyes weren't from grief. They were from the tiniest taste of justice. Nowhere to go, nothing left to lose. You'd think seeing your child in handcuffs would be devastating, and in some part of me, the small maternal part still clinging to the idea that Neil was the boy who once drew me crayon hearts it was. But most of me felt a quiet, shivering kind of satisfaction. They hadn't gotten away with it, not yet. The article said they'd been detained in San Jose under suspicion of money laundering and property fraud. Apparently, Costa Rica took these things seriously, especially when foreign buyers tried to offload toxic assets and claim the proceeds came from a family inheritance. Their property had been seized, their bank accounts frozen, and they were currently awaiting a formal decision about extradition. It was the kind of update that made your tea taste sweeter. The next few days moved in a blur. My lawyer, Jim, connected me with Sarah Peterson, an attorney who specialized in elder fraud. She met me in a modest office that smelled faintly of coffee and paperwork. "I'm going to be honest, Colleen," she said, fingers steepled over a stack of files. "You're not the first, and sadly, you won't be the last. But we have something most victims don't: international leverage." She explained that Neil and Avalon's move to Costa Rica had actually made them vulnerable. They'd declared the funds as a family gift, but hadn't disclosed the known foundation issues on the U.S. sale. That meant they'd imported money obtained through misrepresentation, essentially, criminal fraud. "They wanted paradise," Sarah said with a smirk. "Now they've got it complete with orange jumpsuits and no exit visa." She slid a folder across the table inside a potential settlement agreement. The amount was decent, not enough to undo the damage, but enough to get me out of Margaret's guest room, to start again. There was just one condition: I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. No public statements, no media, no YouTube memoirs. Silence, bought and paid for. "They don't want the embarrassment," Sarah said. "Especially not in Costa Rica. They think money will make this go away." I stared at the page, then closed the folder. "Let me guess," I said. "Avalon wrote that clause herself." Sarah grinned. "Wouldn't be surprised." I didn't sign it. Not yet. Instead, I moved into a temporary apartment funded by emergency victim assistance while the legal proceedings unfolded. It wasn't much: a 400-square-foot studio with beige walls and a bathroom that echoed like a cave, but it was mine. Still, the silence was oppressive. Gone were the sounds of children laughing. Gone were the creaks and groans of my old house, the ones I used to find annoying and now missed like an old friend. I sat most nights staring out a narrow window facing a parking lot, wondering how I'd ended up here. The worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the house. It was the betrayal. Neil had been my whole world, my miracle baby, my reason for holding on after Harold died. I'd changed his diapers, bandaged his knees, clapped the loudest at every school play, and now he was just another con artist with my blood in his veins. One night, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to pick up. "Mrs. Morrison." The voice was soft, hesitant. "This is Detective Martinez with the County Fraud Unit. I was hoping we could speak." He'd been looped in by Jim and Sarah as part of the broader investigation. "We're reviewing the property transfer," he said. "There are irregularities, potentially serious ones." I felt a chill spread down my spine. Like what? "There's evidence that the house had known structural issues that weren't disclosed to the buyers. We're looking into whether your son and daughter-in-law committed real estate fraud." I let out a bitter laugh. "You mean besides emotionally dismantling me like IKEA furniture?" There was a pause. "Mrs. Morrison, we don't believe you were complicit, but you may need to testify. You were the last link in the chain." I agreed. "Of course. What did I have to lose?" Over the following weeks, more came to light. Avalon Restoration Services, remember that the fake company Neil said was handling our basement repairs. It was real on paper, filed in Delaware. Sole owner Avalon Morrison. And guess what? All those repairs they charged me for fake invoices, fake receipts. They'd been siphoning money from me for years under the guise of urgent home improvements. "Colleen," Sarah said gently one afternoon as we sat in her office. This wasn't a moment of desperation. This was a long game, years in the making. They planned this. It felt like a punch to the chest. Years. They'd been playing me while smiling in my face and kissing my cheek on holidays. But the deeper sting was this: I'd handed them the knife. And they hadn't even hesitated. Late one night, as rain tapped against the thin glass of my apartment window, the phone rang again, another international number. I nearly let it go to voicemail. But curiosity won. Mum. Neil's voice was hoarse, tired. Please don't hang up. I said nothing. They're talking about extradition, about prison. Mum, please, think about the kids. I could practically hear the cue cards in the background. Emma and Jake, play the grandkid card, tug the heartstrings. You should have thought about them, I said flatly, before you robbed their grandmother blind. There was silence. Then, a new tactic. It was Avalon's idea. She pushed me. I didn't want. Save it, I snapped. You weren't crying when you signed the deed, or when you cashed the check, or when you left me a note telling me I stink. That wasn't me. But you let it happen. He tried again. Please, if we're extradited, we'll lose everything. You already did, I whispered. You lost me. And I hung up. The next morning, I called Sarah. Push for extradition, I said. I'm done playing nice. You're sure? She asked. I thought about the empty rooms, the cruel note, the lies upon lies. I'm sure. For the first time since this all began, I felt something solid inside me. Not joy, not relief, but power. I may have lost a house, but I'd found my spine. The extradition process moved slowly like honey through a straw, but it moved. Sarah told me the Department of Justice had formally filed paperwork requesting Neil and Avalon's return to face charges of real estate fraud, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse. Apparently, Avalon's fake company and the doctored invoices with a legal cherry on top, too. Meanwhile, my days in the little apartment settled into a strange rhythm: quiet mornings with instant coffee, long walks to clear my mind, and evenings reviewing court documents I barely understood. It should have been overwhelming, but I was oddly at peace. There was a new calm in knowing the truth. Still, sometimes I stared at the ceiling and thought, how did I not see this coming? One afternoon, I sat across from Sarah in her office as she flipped through a folder thick with damning paperwork. There's one more thing we found, she said, sliding over a photo. It was a contractor's invoice dated 6 months before Neil and Avalon asked for help. The work described non-standard alterations to load-bearing walls and partial slab excavation. Ishi. What does that mean? I asked. Sarah tapped the page. It means someone was intentionally tampering with the structural integrity of the house. These weren't repairs, they were sabotages. I stared at her, stunned. They made the foundation worse. Neil had to know what he was doing. He signed the permits. He supervised the work. And when we followed the payment trail, she passed over a copy of a check, made out to Avalon Restoration Services, for $5,000, from my personal account. They charged me, I said quietly, to destroy my own home. Exactly. Sarah leaned in. We can argue that they deliberately devalued the house so you'd feel pressured to sign it over. Then they flipped it before the damage became too obvious. That's not just fraud, that's premeditated exploitation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there, calm and cold as ice water. They had been playing chess. But they'd forgotten that I'd watched Harold play for 40 years and I'd learned a few moves of my own. That evening, I found myself standing in Margaret's backyard, staring at her azaleas while she grilled chicken for dinner. They sabotaged the house, I said softly. Neil and Avalon, on purpose. She paused, tongs hovering over the flames. You mean it was deliberate? I nodded. They made it worse so they could manipulate me. Margaret let out a whistle that could cut glass. That's not just evil. That's architectural malice. I let out a choked laugh. You always know how to name things. She looked at me, dead serious. You're not going to let them walk away, are you? No, not anymore. That night, I went back through every document, every email, every receipt. I pieced together the timeline like a detective. The more I saw, the clearer the picture became. Neil had never been in debt. There had been no foreclosure, no desperate risk of homelessness, just a carefully staged performance meant to break me. And it worked until it didn't. The final straw came in the form of a voicemail. I was washing dishes when my phone buzzed and I heard Neil's voice on speaker. Mum, we know what you're doing. Please, don't do this. You're ruining everything. Ruining everything. They had stolen my life, and I was the one ruining things. I picked up the phone, hit record, and started talking. Not to them, but to myself. Dear Neil, I said, you broke something that can't be repaired, not a house, not a bank account, but the trust I wrapped around you like a second skin. I ended it with, and now, I'll see you in court. Sarah filed the formal complaint 2 days later. That same week, I was called in to speak with federal investigators. I told them everything from the fake repairs to the night they vanished. They listened, they took notes, and when I showed them the photos of the foundation damage, their jaws clenched in quiet rage. This is more than elder abuse, one of them said. This is criminal enterprise. A week later, I received another call from Detective Martinez. They're being brought back, he said. Costa Rica approved the extradition. My hands shook. It'll take some time, paperwork, international cooperation, you know the drill, but they're coming. I whispered, thank you, and sat in stunned silence for several minutes afterward. I was alone in a borrowed room, my only family behind bars in a foreign country, and yet I felt strong, solid, like a house on a newly poured foundation. The next morning, I opened the newspaper and read the headline. American couple to face federal charges after multi-state fraud investigation. Their mugshots stared back at me. Avalon's hair was frizzed, her eyeliner smudged. Neil looked smaller than I remembered, hunched and pale. I clipped the article, not out of spite, but as a reminder, because sometimes justice needs a witness. And I was ready to testify. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not physically, just emotionally barren, like justice had stripped everything decorative out of the space and left only the bones. I sat on the witness bench in a navy sweater that still smelled faintly of Margaret's dryer sheets, waiting for my name to be called. I wasn't nervous. Not exactly. But I kept wringing my hands in my lap like I was trying to squeeze out the last drops of fear. Because this wasn't just a trial. This was the confrontation I never got at my kitchen table. This was where Neil would be forced to look me in the eye and see what he'd done. Sarah Peterson sat beside me, her briefcase full of carefully arranged evidence invoices, receipts, foundation reports, emails, check stubs, all the breadcrumbs they left behind. It was neat, tidy, ironclad. "They're going to try to play the sympathy card," she whispered. "Just remember they had years to do the right thing, and they never chose it." I nodded. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here for the truth." She looked at me like I'd just passed some kind of test. Good, because the truth is going to set a precedent. Neil and Avalon were escorted in, wearing matching beige suits that clearly weren't prison-issued. Avalon looked like she'd spent the night crying into a mirror. Neil just looked lost, not angry, not remorseful, just hollow. I didn't flinch when he saw me. He did. The trial began, with the prosecutor laying out the charges: financial elder abuse, real estate fraud, insurance fraud, wire fraud, and a delightful bonus criminal conspiracy. Avalon's lawyer immediately tried to paint her as a passive participant. She was under duress, he said, following her husband's desperate lead. She didn't understand the financial complexity, which would have been more convincing if she hadn't signed every fake invoice and deposited every check into Avalon Restoration Services. When it was my turn to testify, I stood up slowly, walked to the stand, and looked the jury straight in the eye. I gave them everything. I began: my money, my home, my trust, not because I was naive, but because I loved them, because I believed that helping family wasn't something you regretted. I told them everything from the phone call that started it all to the cruel note they left behind. I told them about the structural issues, the forged documents, the deliberate sabotage. I told them how my own son sat in my kitchen and cried lies into his coffee. But the moment I saw the jurors shift forward in their seats, that came when I described the note. "Old loser, you stink." That's how they said goodbye. Not even a thank you, just an insult, just a warning shot to my self-worth. The court was silent. I let it hang there like fog. "I've been many things in my life," I continued, "but a loser isn't one of them. And if this court allows people like my son and his wife to get away with this, then we are telling every vulnerable senior in this country that they are expendable, that love makes you foolish, that trust is a weakness, and I refuse to be that kind of story." I stepped down with my spine straight and my pulse like thunder in my ears. Sarah leaned over and whispered, "They'll be quoting that one for years." The defence tried to rattle me during cross-examination, but it didn't work. They asked why I didn't get my own lawyer, why I didn't verify the foreclosure, why I trusted so easily. I smiled. Because I'm a mother, and we don't demand receipts from our children when they say they're drowning. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, I didn't breathe. The verdict: guilty. On all counts. Avalon broke first. She slumped in her chair, sobbing into her hands. Neil just sat there, staring at nothing. The sentencing hearing was scheduled a month later. They received 7 and 5 years respectively, plus restitution and asset forfeiture. I was awarded compensation both from the seized Costa Rican accounts and from a newly established victim protection fund for elder financial abuse cases. It wasn't just about money. It was validation. The judge called my case a wake-up call, my testimony a model for dignity in the face of manipulation. I didn't cry. Not in the courtroom. Not when the gavel came down. Not even when Neil was led out in cuffs and looked back at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I waited until I was home, back in Margaret's guest room, staring out the window at her blooming azaleas. That's when the tears came. Not from grief, from release, from something finally being over. That night, I slept like I hadn't in years. No nightmares, no doubt. Just quiet. The kind that doesn't echo, the kind that heals. When I woke the next morning, I was surprised to find the sun already high, warming the little window in my borrowed room. For the first time in months, my body hadn't jolted me awake with anxiety or dread. It was as though my muscles finally understood they were no longer under siege. Still, the weight of everything lingered. Justice might have been served, but peace, that's a different meal, one that takes time to prepare. Sarah called me later that day. "There's more," she said. "We've been digging through old tax records and transactions. Turns out, Avalon was running more than just a fake construction company." My heart sank. How much more? She created 4 shell companies. Colleen, 1 in Delaware, 1 in Nevada, 2 offshore. Every single one funneled money through short-term real estate renovation projects, almost all tied to properties she coerced family members into selling or signing over. You were her biggest score, but not her only one. I couldn't breathe for a moment. She did this to others. Sarah nodded grimly. A cousin, an uncle with dementia, even her own godmother. "We've contacted them all. You weren't a target of opportunity. You were the plan." Avalon hadn't just manipulated Neil, she had shaped him into a weapon. And I'd helped load the bullets. I sat in the courthouse archive room for hours that week, reviewing every affidavit, financial statement, and deposition. I don't know what I was looking for: closure, maybe, or understanding. But what I found instead was a kind of haunted consistency. Every paper trail had the same signature moves, inflated repair estimates, emotional blackmail, forged urgency. One note in the file stuck out. It was from Avalon to Neil, dated 6 months before their visit. "If we can get her to sign it before spring, we can move the money before the freeze. She's not mentally sharp anymore. Just use the foreclosure story, it'll hit her guilt button fast." I read it twice, then 3 more times. The words turned my stomach into knots. Her guilt button. I never knew my love could be a weakness, but Avalon did. She counted on it. She bet on it. And she nearly won. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, tight and precise, all capital letters. Neil's. Inside was a single page. "Mum, I know there's nothing I can say to undo what I did. I was a coward. I followed Avalon because I thought she had the answers, but all she had was ambition and a checklist, and I was too weak to stop her. You didn't deserve any of this. You deserved to be safe. I destroyed that. And now I'm sitting in a cell thinking about the sound of your voice when you used to hum while cooking. It plays in my head like a song I can't turn off. I'm sorry. I love you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I remember. I remember everything. Neil." I folded the letter once, then again, and tucked it into the back of my drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed. A few days later, I met with Sarah and the federal investigators for one final deposition. The goal was to wrap up my part in the larger fraud case and close out restitution procedures. One of the agents, a sharp woman with auburn hair and tired eyes, looked at me and said, "You've done more than most people could bear." I smiled politely. I just wanted my life back. And slowly, I was getting it. The government approved the return of a portion of the seized funds to me, enough to secure housing, replace lost retirement savings, and provide long-term security. But beyond the money, They also offered something unexpected: my name added to a federal task force's outreach program for elder fraud awareness. "They want me to speak?" I asked, surprised. "They want your story," Sarah said, "because your voice could save someone else's mother from going through this." I thought about it that night, staring at the ceiling. I'd always imagined growing old with gardening gloves and crossword puzzles. Not press conferences and legal panels, but maybe life doesn't ask permission to change you. Maybe it just hands you the microphone and waits to see if you'll speak. I picked up Neil's letter again, read it one more time, then gently placed it into a small lockbox I kept under the bed. Some wounds don't close, but they scar, and scars mean healing. The next morning, I called Sarah and said yes, I'll do it. She was quiet for a moment, then she said something I'll never forget. "Colleen, you didn't just survive fraud. You dismantled it." It was the first time anyone had said I was strong without also saying I was foolish. And I believed it. So I sat down at the little kitchen table in my small apartment and started writing my speech, not for revenge, not even for closure, but as a light for someone still in the dark. Because someone, somewhere, needed to hear that their love wasn't a flaw. It was the very thing that made them worth saving. And if I could reach them in time, then none of this was in vain. I wasn't used to stages. I wasn't used to microphones, bright lights, or podiums set up in front of strangers. I'd spent most of my life behind the scenes packing lunches, tending gardens, paying bills on time, remembering everyone's birthdays. I wasn't the one who stood in front of a room and told a story. I was the one who quietly made sure there was a room to begin with. But there I was. The Senior Fraud Awareness event was held in a modest civic centre, decorated with folding chairs, banners about financial safety, and trays of cookies from the local church. The audience was mostly older adults, some with canes or walkers, others with grandchildren tugging at their sleeves. But every face carried the same thing I saw in the mirror these days: experience and caution wrapped in a fragile kind of hope. I'd been slotted last on the speaker list, right after a young man from the Attorney General's office explained the warning signs of financial scams. "Never sign over your property without a third-party review," he said. "If someone pressures you, pause. You always have the right to pause." When it was my turn, my knees didn't shake. I stepped up to the podium, took a sip of water, and began. "My name is Colleen Morrison," I said, "and a year ago, I lost my house." I told them everything. Not in legalese or numbers, but in stories. The coffee mug Neil held in trembling hands, the way Avalon's heels clicked like a metronome of manipulation. The moment I found the note they left calling me a loser, the sound of my own heart breaking in the quiet after they disappeared. I watched as people in the audience leaned forward. Some clutched their purses, others nodded in sad recognition. Then I told them how I fought back. Not with anger, but with paperwork, testimony, and the strength I didn't know I still had. I told them about Sarah, about the extradition, the trial, the verdict, the restitution. And I told them this: kindness without boundaries is not love. It's vulnerability without offence. And predators, yes, even the ones who share your blood, can smell an open gate. The room was silent. A man in the third row wiped his eyes. A woman with silver braids reached for her daughter's hand. "I loved my son," I said, voice thick. "I still do, but love is not a reason to allow yourself to be dismantled. And if sharing my shame helps even one of you lock your front door a little tighter, ask one more question, double-check one more form, then I haven't lost everything. I've gained purpose. When I stepped down, the room stood. Some clapped, some didn't. Some simply looked at me like I'd cracked something open in them. Afterward, a small line formed. People came up to hug me, to thank me. One woman, Beverly, said her niece had been asking her to sign over her condo just to make things easier. I thought I was being difficult for saying no, she said, clutching my hands. Now I think I was being brave. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment with a mug of tea and the fading adrenaline of the day, I looked at the envelope Neil's letter came in. I hadn't touched it since locking it away. But something tugged at me. I pulled it out and reread his words. I remember everything. I wondered what he meant. The humming while cooking, the way I used to rub his back when he was sick, the way I used to sing old Ella Fitzgerald songs while folding laundry. Was he remembering me? Or just the parts of me he needed to survive the prison sentence? I didn't know. But I folded the letter again, neatly this time, and slid it back into the lockbox. Then I did something strange. I picked up a pen and began to write him back. Neil, you were my miracle baby. That will never change. You were also the architect of the worst pain I've ever felt. That will never change either. I don't know what healing looks like yet. I don't know if we'll ever speak again face to face. But I wanted you to know this I remember, too. I remember your laugh. I remember you falling asleep in my lap while I read you Goodnight Moon. I remember how proud your father was of you. I remember who you were before the money, before Avalon, before ambition twisted you into someone I didn't recognize. Maybe there's still a part of that boy in you. Maybe not. I hope someday you find out. But until then, I'll keep living, and I'll keep telling the truth. Mum. I didn't mail it. Not yet. But I felt better having written it. Words have power. So does silence. And I was learning, finally, how to choose between the two. That was my victory. Not the check. Not the speech. But the fact that I could stand tall, even with the cracks in my foundation. Especially because of them. A few months after the trial, I received a letter from the Housing Support Fund. I was eligible for a special senior assistance grant, a program created in part because of the attention my case had drawn. It would allow me to purchase a modest home, mortgage-free, as part of a pilot effort to restore financial stability for victims of familial exploitation. I stood at the mailbox with the letter in my hands, stunned. They were offering me a house. Not just money, an actual home, my own. It felt surreal. The last time I'd held keys to something that was mine, I'd been betrayed, and now the world, somehow, was handing me a second chance. I didn't rush into it. I took my time, toured quiet neighbourhoods, spoke with kind realtors who didn't talk down to me, and finally settled on a small craftsman-style cottage on a corner lot in a sleepy street lined with cherry trees. It had peeling paint on the porch railings and creaky floors in the hallway, but the bones were good. And most importantly, it felt honest. On the day I signed the papers, I brought Margaret with me. She wore a cardigan embroidered with tiny pears and brought a mason jar of lemonade like we were on a picnic. "You sure about this one?" she asked, squinting up at the roof. "I don't need perfect," I said, "just something real." When the agent handed me the keys, I didn't cry. I smiled, pressed them to my chest, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, I slept on a blow-up mattress in the living room surrounded by unopened boxes and silence. But this silence didn't ache, it soothed. I was home. Over the next weeks, I settled in slowly. I painted the walls soft shades of sage and cream, hung wind chimes by the front door, baked blueberry muffins even when there was no one to share them with. Because I was finally doing things for myself, not for approval, not for family, not out of duty, just because it made me happy. The front yard had been neglected, so I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I planted marigolds, cut back the overgrown hedges, and found a small stone angel buried under ivy near the porch. I cleaned it off and placed it by the walkway. A reminder, even things lost for years can be found again, cleaned off and cherished. One afternoon, while raking leaves, I noticed a small white envelope sticking out of my mailbox. No postage, hand-delivered. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a card with only 2 words. Still sorry. It wasn't signed. But I didn't need it to be. The handwriting was unmistakable. Neil's? He'd been released early on good behaviour and assigned to a community rehabilitation programme. Part of his sentence required working for a non-profit rebuilding homes for elderly abuse victims. Apparently, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. I didn't know what to do with the card. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel forgiveness. Just something quieter, like a bruise that doesn't throb anymore, just fades. That night, I placed the card beside his old letter in the lockbox. Oh, let time decide what to do with it. Weeks passed. One morning, I woke to the sound of a hammer outside. I rushed to the window and found a crew fixing the sidewalk cracks in front of my house. City workers. One of them had thick, dark hair under his cap and broad shoulders I recognized in an instant. Neil. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and pretended not to. He worked carefully, respectfully, without a hint of arrogance or shame, just a man doing his job, pouring fresh concrete into old wounds. I didn't call out, didn't wave, but I watched. And in that watching, I felt something lift. He was rebuilding the world, one slab at a time. Maybe he was rebuilding himself too. Later that day, I found a single, perfect camellia flower on my porch step. No note, no wrapper. Just the flower. Soft pink. Still dewy. It reminded me of the ones that grew outside his window when he was a boy. I placed it in a glass of water on the windowsill and left it there. No words exchanged. No letters written. Just a flower. A whisper of apology. A whisper of, I remember. And that was enough. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a camellia. Sometimes it's a path not shouted down but walked gently. Sometimes it's not justice or revenge that brings peace. Sometimes it's a quiet moment on a new porch, watching the world go by, knowing you survived. And you did it on your own terms. It's funny how life narrows in the most beautiful ways when you let go of all the noise. The porch on my new home became my favourite place. I painted the railings robin's egg blue and planted lavender in pots along the steps. Every evening, I'd sit there with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sky shift from amber to deep violet, letting the quiet wrap around me like a shawl. I didn't need much. The truth is, I had been chasing more for most of my life, not money, not things, but meaning. I'd poured everything into being useful, being needed, being the glue that held other people's stories together. But now, I was the story, and it was enough. Sometimes Margaret would come over with her ridiculous cinnamon raisin bread. And we'd sit and laugh about everything from politics to how the squirrels had started stealing her garden gloves. Sometimes I'd get letters from people who'd seen me speak, thanking me for giving them the courage to say no to their own manipulative family members. Sometimes I'd think about Neil. I didn't hate him anymore. That was the strange, almost sacred truth. I couldn't forget, and I didn't think I'd ever fully trust him again, but hate had drained out of me like bad rainwater through a crack in the floorboards. What remained was the love that existed before the betrayal. The part of me that still remembered the sound of his baby laugh, the way his small hands used to clutch mine at the grocery store, how he'd once cried when a bird flew into a window. The boy, not the man he became, and maybe, just maybe, the man he was becoming again. One evening in early spring, I received a small envelope. Inside was a simple flyer. It was an invitation to the dedication of a new community centre funded by the same program Neil had been assigned to. His name was listed at the bottom under Rehabilitation Team. There was no note. Just his name. A whisper again. I didn't go, but I smiled. I left a small donation under the name the Morrison Foundation, not because I wanted credit, but because I wanted to reclaim the name they tried to break, to make it stand for rebuilding, for dignity, for people who had once felt invisible and chose to rise instead. Later that week, I opened my front door to find a brown paper bag on my porch. Inside was a hand-carved wooden bird, rough edges, simple shape, wings stretched wide, no signature. I placed it beside the camellia card and the letter. No fanfare, no confrontation. Just quiet reconciliation. Healing, I've learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just arrives in pieces. In patched concrete sidewalks. In a flower left with care. In the sound of a hammer swinging in rhythm with a slow, steady heart. And in the stillness of an old woman sitting on her porch, smiling at the horizon, knowing she survived the storm. Because storms pass. And when they do, if you're lucky or maybe just patient, you find that the sun still knows your name. And it's waiting! Always waiting. To warm your face again.